So, very, very good morning, everybody, and welcome to this fourth in our series of 5 teachings on forbearance. Many people say patience. And those of you who are here live, very good morning. And those watching on YouTube, then good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. So let's start, as we always do, with the finest heart and mind and intention, motivation that we can muster, gathering ourselves, quietening down, focusing, having a very, very big mind, inclusive mind, and a loving, caring heart, and very, very happy mind to be here together and to be drinking in the teachings of the Buddha on this very, very necessary topic of forbearance. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on, until we reach the very heart of enlightenment, through the practice of generosity and all 6 transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every being be well, live long, be healthy, be well provided for, and have good friends, and find respect. May they live in places of peace and plenty. Most of all, may they practice dharma. May they each create the causes for these things to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating the causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being that's totally beyond suffering. And may they attain the great equanimity, free of closeness or distance from anyone. Deyata shame shamavati shameta shakru Om kurimara jitte karota ke yorite jovate Ollo yane bishudane male malapana ye Kukure kaka grasana Om mukhi paramukhi amukhi shamme davani savagraha bandhanane Nigrihitva Sawa bhava pravadina vimukta marabhasha savitva buddha mudra anudgatita savamare butsarita varishuddhi bigashantu savamara kama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our heads, on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. So today, we move on from the first of the 3 aspects of forbearance that we are learning to the second. The first one was about dealing with hostility from what is other people, life circumstances, health. It's hard to know whether to put health in this first one or in the second one, but let's put it in the first one. It is what could make us, or what has made us in the past, upset. In all the ranges of upset that we studied in the very first of these teachings, from being angry and actually doing angry things, hurting others, people, physically, verbally, and in the process damaging ourselves, from violent anger, violent speech, all the way down to a continual nagging frustration and dissatisfaction in our minds, where we're not happy people. And irritated is a good word. Irritants, you see it on bottles, chemicals. Something is irritant. So life can be irritant. Some things that are irritant, they can kill you. Some things make a skin rash. So others, you can't breathe properly. There are all sorts of irritants. They're irritating people, and there are irritating politicians and circumstances. And so looking at that, what I wanted to do before moving on was to come back to the very beginning of these teachings. Gampopa tells us, as he does with each paramita, what are the drawbacks? What's the problem? If this is there, and what's the benefits if you've got the remedy, which is the paramita? So we saw that anger, hostility, being able to be irritated. This is the point. As long as your mind is able to be upset, then one day, out of the blue, a big upset could destroy everything. Could destroy months, years, lifetimes of work. In terms of dharma practice, it could take you off course, and off course for many lives, sometimes hundreds of lives. There are stories of this. And so if I don't remember later, somebody please remind me, railway tracks. It's a theme, railway tracks. So I'd like to share two quotes from very, very great teachers that you may or may not have heard of. The first one is from Dampa Sonje. Dampa Sonje, most people think of him as the person who gave us the Chut practice. Chut itself, cutting through practice, belongs to a greater tradition. It's part of the teachings of a greater tradition called the pacifying tradition, which is one of the 8, they call them the 8 great chariots, or the 8 great cartloads would be a better translation, although it doesn't look so poetic in books. So people say the 8 chariots, but it's the 8 cartloads of teachings that came from India. It's the 8 main traditions. And so, his story is fascinating. Better not go there because it's a long story. It goes over several lifetimes, and it's a bit fantastic in a way. Well, let's see a little bit of it anyway. He was a fairly young and good-looking and fit, and he trained in quite a lot of yogic practices. One of which was the ability to take your mind out the body and go somewhere, and for that you need to park your body. It's a bit like parking a car and then going into the shopping center. You park your body, then the mind goes out. So his mind left his body because there was a very contaminated corpse that was threatening a village. Some versions of the story say a human corpse that no one wanted to touch. Some say an elephant's corpse that nobody could shift because it was too big. But anyway, it was rotting And so because it had just died, his mind left his body, parked it, and then went into the elephant's body, let's say with an elephant. Then the elephant kind of, he animates the body, and the element walks away from the village and then ends up in a forest where it can rot away in peace. And then he takes his mind out the elephant and he goes back into his body. But in the meantime, an old yogi, old, short, gnarled, it says not good looking one bit, who was old, so he's coming near the end of his life. He sees this freshly dead body to his mind, vacant body, young, fit, good looking. He thinks, whoa. So he knew, he was a yogi who knew this called transference practice. So he left his old body and he took Dampa Sonje's body and went off. So Dampa Sonje comes back to find where he left his body, an old Indian body. It's all he's got if he wants to exist on earth and carry on. So he puts his consciousness in that, and from then on, he's manifest as this very dark-skinned, wiry, old Indian master. But he was one of the gurus of Machik Lapdrun, who's very, very famous for the Inucha teachings, and very much loved these days because it's a woman guru. So anyway, in his teachings, then he says, you don't understand that a moment's action arising from anger is worse than 100 actions arising from desire. If you've really assimilated the teachings properly, everything you do, everything you say, everything you think should be as soft as stepping on cotton wool, and as mild as tsampa soup laced with butter. So tsampa soup is very, very thin porridge, and it's thin butter porridge, very mild and very medicinal, sort of thing you give somebody who is recovering. But it may well be the contrary. And the slightest virtuous practice you do or vow you keep makes you feel very pleased with yourself and puffs you up with pride. Or every time anyone says a single word you're extremely sensitive to, or the way in which they're saying it, then you boil with anger. You boil with anger if you think you're being humiliated or criticized. That sort of touchiness is a sign that your mind and the Dharma have gone separate ways, and the Dharma has not changed your mind in the least. Now, I'm reading that. Some of the more expanded versions of teachings on this are very perceptive. They're very perceptive of the Buddhist world, the monastic world, the world of people practicing Dharma, and so on, because it's a whole industry. I call it industrial Dharma. You can study just like academics can study. People can spend their whole lives doing degree after degree, research after research. Buddhist scholarity is facts, is structures, and there's so much of it. And to encompass all of it would be almost impossible. It's like science is too much for any one mind to hold all of it. You need a scientific community. We have a Dharma community of wise, learned people. But it's learning. It's putting facts in your brain. It's having clever analysis and structures, no more. And then meditation is fiddling with your energies, basically, and your body-mind relationship. It's done all over the world in all sorts of traditions. It is not necessarily dharma, liberating you from ego, bringing you all the qualities of Buddha nature, and so on. So meditation, practice, study, they're very important parts of our Dharma path, but we can get it wrong. They can make our ego grow. So then, as Padampa Sanjay says, we become more and more touchy, more and more sensitive. We want more fame. We get more jealous of other people, better meditators, better scholars, and we can't take criticism. So if that's happening, then it says you're going in the opposite direction. And they say you can't. A person can't at the same time ride two horses, one east, one west. You're on the one or you're on the other. It says a needle with 2 points can't fix anything, can't sew anything. It says fire and water can't carry on existing inside the same pot. It's easy. Our Dharma journey means less and less ego, less and less desire, less and less anger. Whatever's doing that, wonderful. And whatever's leading in the opposite direction, and especially to anger, because as he says at the beginning, anger is the time bomb. One day that can go off. And if we feed it now and feed it another time, we've got the habit of buying into anger, irritation, aggression, criticism, blame, all those things that go together. Then it can get worse, or one day it can become such a big one that we cause an awful lot of damage. So we need to work from the beginning, dealing with every bit of irritation, every bit of anger, so that we're on the horse that's going in the right direction. We've got a needle that can fix things, and we've either got a warming pot of fire or a delicious pot of water. We need to be following the Dharma. Now, the reason the commentaries say this is because, let's not talk about the modern day, it's too delicate. Let's talk about the past. And in Tibet, where these masters were commentating, they say, some people say, what a wonderful Dharma person, what a wonderful teacher, because he manages to combine worldly life and Dharma and do both. And they say, in the end, it's not really possible. You can combine a semblance of a factual, material, tangible worldly life, like Akon Rinpoche. He was married, he had a house, he had to run a bed and, well, he didn't, his wife did, but run a bed and breakfast to give the family an income. What the commentaries and Dampa Sanjay are talking about is somebody who still manifests, lives desire, who gets angry, and so on and so forth. It's a huge topic, and it's become very relevant as our modern world meets traditional Tibetan Buddhism, and then in the various Buddhist scandals that have happened in organizations where the teacher has behaved in a very questionable way, let's say. So because there's this idea that somehow you can do both, and because some very advanced teachings show how anger and desire can be the doorways to great realization, if you've got that far on the path, if you've got that far, then that all gets mixed up. Teachings for a high level get applied to beginners, and it gets very confusing. There's an awful lot of this today. There is an awful lot. And so anyway, anger in particular is something we need to be very, very cautious of. And it's great because we can work with little irritations. And when we are a little bit irritated, someone's uncomfortable, this is wonderful. Really, we can apply the teachings with a little thing, it's easy. I say, thank you. Because, it's like here, I give you an example. I've got two very irritating neighbors. They could be men, they happen to be ladies. The neighbor on that side has got one of the loudest voices I've ever heard, and she is very egotistic. So she's always her voice and ego fill up about half a square kilometer. On the other side, I've got a different lady, but also with a loud voice, and she drinks quite a bit, and the more she drinks, the louder she gets, and the more stupid the conversation becomes, and she laughs, and it's a very kind of neurotic laughter. So this is wonderful, isn't it? Because working with these, then I can think, great, Ken, here comes more forbearance training. I can't tell you how grating that voice is. A lesser person might go and strangle her, I think. But anyway, so we can work with little things, tiny things. It's too hot, it's too cold. The quality of your biscuits has changed. They've got the same name on the packet, but they don't taste like they did 10 years ago. Little things. We can train, because it's only by building up the reflex with the little things and then bigger things that when the challenging things come, that we can cope. You won't just be able to cope by a magic wand out of the blue. We need to train. So now let's go on to the second quote, and this is from Patrul Rinpoche. Oh no, sorry, it's from Geshe Chengawa, great mind training teacher. If, as we study, reflect, and meditate, our ego grows bigger and bigger, and our patience becomes more fragile than a baby's skin, and we feel even more irritable than a demon, these are sure signs that our practice has taken the wrong directions. Now, his next words remind me very much of Akon Rinpoche's words, very much. Always be humble, dress modestly, and treat everyone, whether good, bad, or mediocre, with respect. Tame your mind with the Dharma, taking the love and compassion of bodhicitta as your basis. Without any doubt, this is the most essential of all practices. It's better than 1,000 most sublime views or most profound meditations, which do no good to the mind. So of course we'd need to, talk about this. I need to unpack it more, but I think the main point is there. And especially today, we have so much available online of these deep view teachings and discussions and many so-called profound meditations. But of course, it's not the method that's profound. It's like going into a pharmacy and you say, what's your most expensive medicine? And they say, that one's, I want it. Doesn't matter what you're ill with, it's the most expensive or the rarest medicine in the world. You see this in China. There's a Tibetan herb. It's called Yatsa Gumbu. Funny little thing. Cordyceps, I think it's called in Latin. It looks like a plant in the summer and a caterpillar in the winter. So whether it's a caterpillar that hides and breeds inside a plant, or whether it's a plant that looks like a caterpillar so it gets eaten by birds, but it certainly does, and it's got some medicinal qualities. It's quite rare, but because it's rare, then a market grew in China. So it went from being a few cents to €1 to being €2. And then because it's €2 and rarer, then more people want it. So the plant's disappearing from Tibet. Poor people can make so much money going out looking for it's a little root, tiny root, just this big, digging it up. It costs a fortune, and people want it because it's rare. It is medicinal, but it's not that medicinal. I mean, it's not going to make you 30 years younger or cure your cancer or something like that. Usually you take it in alcohol. You leave some of the roots in alcohol, and then you drink it, leave it for weeks, months. And then the alcohol stinks of fish afterwards. It's not fish, but it smells like fish. So you need to kind of hold your nose and drink it, but it's quite tonic anyway. So if you went into a pharmacy, would that be a wonderful thing to do? Something only rich people can afford? Give me your most expensive medicine? Or would it be stupidity? You need a medicine, however cheap or expensive, that suits your condition. And it's exactly the same with meditation. There is no such thing as a profound technique. It's only profound if that technique is used by somebody who's already gone a long way along the path. And for a beginner to use it, it's just going to cause trouble or disappointment because nothing happens. And some of the most simple practices, and my teachers, Akron Rinpoche, Taisitupa, the Karmapa, have always said, refuge, prostration, if you could do those well, it's all you need to become Buddha. Nothing else. Nothing else. Everything is in each practice. 4 ways of changing the mind. Meditations. You do one of those fully, it's all you could ever need. Then it becomes profound. Anyway, anger. Let's come back to our focus. Anger, and now we've seen Shantideva's 9-fold way of working on our tendency to be upset. And we've seen Asanga's 5-fold way. Our aim is, we go back to the definition, is to have a mind which is not disturbed by anything, which means it can remain all the time in the sweetness of love and compassion for everyone. So that's Dampa Somje. He says your mind soft like cotton. And sometimes Akon Rinpoche used to say, you're like a ball of cotton, ball of fluff, blown across the landscape. So whatever you touch lightly, you touch the bushes, you touch the rocks. As we go through life, then we are gentle. Wherever we meet, whatever the circumstances, nothing but sweetness and kindness centered in our heart chakra. We never leave that place because this is wrong, that's upsetting, this is not right, I'm in the wrong place, whatever it is that's uncomfortable, disturbing. So of course we can't do this overnight. We need a dharma path, but we know where we're going and we know what's stopping us going there. And in this case, anger, which is only there when it's provoked. Desire's a bit different. We kind of walk around with desire inside us. It's a constant state. one's, I can say, on the lookout for donuts, nice places, people, bodies, whatever. We kind of carry that in us with desire. Anger, something happens. We can't control the triggers. It's very different. So anyway, that's enough about the first type of forbearance, dealing with what is other and upsets the mind. So now we move on to the second type of forbearance. So it's the same idea. We want to stay all the time in the sweetness, the softness, the control of bodhicitta. But now, what might make us lose that is suffering, our own suffering. So it's not other, it's our own suffering. And in particular, and when we look long term, this second section is focused on the suffering involved in practicing dharma. The suffering involved in really practicing dharma. So this is where it becomes a bit challenging for me to try and get the key point across. To talk briefly about not the dharma bit, but the other bit, the suffering that doesn't really come from other, although it depends how you look at it, but which comes from ourself. It can be physical suffering, because through illness, through old age, through inability, it can be physical, or it can be mental, where we realize, we have to live with ourselves. And so the suffering that's from other, you can sometimes avoid it. You can move away. You can leave somebody. You can make a new life, new way of life. The suffering from others, sometimes we can do something about it. And then as we go through our life, the landscape changes. The people who are big in our lives come, they go. And then we lived in this place, you lived in that place, and here you did this job, then you did that job. The outer other changes, but all the time you're there. And you will be there in the next life, the life afterwards. So part of Dharma is learning to live happily with ourselves, even if ourself isn't happy, if you see what I mean. We have to, at the beginning, learn to live happy with an unhappy me, with a confused me, with a conflicted me, gradually through acceptance, through skill, through understanding, the fact that you can't get rid of yourself. You can't get a holiday from yourself. Sleep, maybe. And we'll never know what it's like to be somebody else. I had a thing, I often share it in teachings. I don't have many new examples, but coming from the early days of my Tibetan experience, my first exposure to the Tibetans was in Dharamsala. They needed money. I went to Dharamsala, spent a few months there, and the main reason I came back in 1970, 71 was to raise money to help them. I thought I'd try and put on a pop concert and things like this, raise money to be able to take back, because they were refugees, so poor and so much to be done. That never happened in my case. But I thought, later on. Imagine that the Dalai Lama could rent out his mind for 15 minutes. If we could be somebody else, not like in the story I told earlier where you get their body, but for 15 minutes, you pay $1 million and you're the Dalai Lama. Once in a lifetime experience. But we can't. I thought that would be a great fundraiser. Dalai Lama, then the other top lamas. You could just rent out your mind at ridiculous prices to people with ridiculous money, and then help hundreds, thousands of people with the income. But we never can. We never can. We can. There's some osmosis. There's some little bit of mixing we can have with each other. But basically, we have to live with ourselves from now on, forever. Wonderful. We have the tools to help us learn to do that beautifully. Let me share another story from very early days of Samiling. Today's story day, by the way. That's what you do when the teaching's challenging, tell stories. It's whenever you become a Dharma teacher, remember, I got this from Ken, tell stories. Very early days in the old Samiling Johnston house, just one house where everything took place. And the lunch queue was very communal. Akon Rinpoche, who was the only Lama in the center, queued up with everybody. No priority, didn't get served at a special table, he just queued up and served himself. And often the lunch was late, and nobody minded, we just chatted in the queue. So I was actually in front of Rinpoche, and behind him was a newcomer young lady. And she was obviously working up the courage to ask him a question. And in the end, she said, Rinpoche. So he turned around and looked, he said, oh yeah. What's it like when it all ends? So of course the ears like mine, which were listening to the conversation, are then waiting for the answer. And he looked at her very stonewall serious, and he said, you think it ever ends? I cut our appetite for lunch. Anyway, we have a long way to go. Long, long, long way. So we need to learn to live with ourselves. Well, a lot to do. This teaching, forbearance, the next paramita, diligence, so vital in that long journey. So anyway, although this dealing with suffering that's not from other can be applied to our own physical suffering and our own mental suffering, because we're not happy with ourselves, our minds are conflicted, are confused, we can feel how primitive our minds are, and so on. Mainly, it applies to the suffering of practicing Dharma. We're training in the paramita for many lives. We're starting a process. We're starting a new habit that we want to pick up next life and next life that becomes stronger and stronger. Now, a lot of the texts about this classically talk about the sufferings of going out to beg for your food every day, getting your 3 Dharma robes, finding shelter and safety when you live the homeless life. So it's talking about monastics, but the oldest scriptures come from a time when monastics were itinerant in a country where it was possible to be itinerant. I remember, I think more stories, in 1973. We didn't have any Tibetan teachers teaching courses in Samiling. Akon Rinpoche invited teachers from other traditions. We had a Burmese monk who'd just come from Burma, and he taught us a meditation course. Didn't have much English. And at the end, he said, well, in a very squeaky voice, he said, now you know, you can leave everything and wander, sleep by the side of the road at night, beg for your food, and just meditate all the time. I don't think, nobody in the room was quite ready to do that. But obviously he came from a place where things like that can happen. You say, yeah, meditation. Okay, so you leave everything and you just meditate and beg. I lived a few years without money, more or less, and just wearing any old clothes and traveling and so on. You can do it. It's a very, very good experience. But and it can be hard. It can be hard. You have to eat what they put in your bowl. If they put cooked spiders in your bowl, you have to eat cooked spiders. Whatever. You can't say, oh, I don't want that, or haven't you got any pickles, or whatever. You go around begging, or whatever they put in your bowl, you have to eat, and so on. So there's a plus and a minus to that aspect of the hardships of following the path of Dharma. The plus is that your existence is very well defined. You're a monk, you're a nun, you're living in however much simplicity you can live. Your task is to meditate and to study. The whole point of the monastic life, taking the vows, is that, so that you free up your mind, your time, which is taken up normally in property, in shopping, cooking, eating, washing up, and all of that. You liberate your time and your mind's preoccupation with all those things, and you give yourself maximum opportunity to study and meditate. So you study and you meditate. So your life is very well defined. If you're a yogi with a guru and living with a guru like Milarepa and his disciples and many, like many of the Karmapas traveled in an encampment across Tibet to China, back again. A lot of their life was in an encampment, traveling life, dedicated to study and meditation around the Karmapa. So there, your life is clear-cut, very disciplined. Not much choice, but is a golden cage with an open door that you go into happily. A golden cage with an open door that you go into happily. So then the main hardships are these material hardships and travel you might have to do to go to a great scholar or whatever. But of course, you are not monastics living by the side of the road and going on a begging round every day to get your food. So we're looking more not at the material hardships of Dharma practice, but at the psychological challenges. And these are many and very important. And this is the reason I sent you those couple of reincarnation stories, because so much of our Dharma development, or lack of it, will depend on how much you believe in long term. coffee break. So we're grown up, intelligent people, used to organizing our lives. We do think long term. You don't, what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of my first working time, 50 years ago or more. And at the end of the week, you got a brown envelope with your pay in it. And then the next Friday, you got your next week's pay. So if you're wise, you don't spend it all on Friday night, because then you've got nothing Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. And by the time Wednesday and Thursday comes, it's really difficult. You, of course, plan over the week. When we live life, worldly life, we plan for retirement, we plan for our children's education. We don't just blow everything we got. We know about planning. We don't, it's like me. I've been on various sorts of special diets for years now. I'm planning to live as long as I can. So even though I might fancy whatever it is, a pizza or something sugary or creamy, I don't. I don't. Just don't touch them, because I'm planning long term. We're very much used, look at your own life is the answer to this. Look at your own life, how you do think long term. You don't just think in the immediate moment, or just today, or even this week. Okay, that's what intelligent, wise humans do. But intelligent, wise Buddhist humans don't do that quite the same, because our long term doesn't end at death. And this is the big difference. And this is challenge number one, because unless you grew up in a Buddhist family, everything you heard coming at you through all your learning, informal, formal learning, is all based on a picture of one life only. Our whole mind's vision is about coping with this life. After the end of this life, there's kind of, well, look in your own mind. What is there? Kind of a blank area. This life is a package of karma. So anyway, as Buddhists, then we think of the next life. Now, not just as Buddhists. If you look at Christianity, if you look at Islam, look at the religions of the book, if you look at Hinduism, if you look at many faiths, they don't talk about reincarnation like we Buddhists do, but very, very, very clearly, they tell you that your experience does not stop at death. And they tell you something else, the same as Buddhists, that what will happen to you after death depends very much on what you did in this life and how much you used the opportunities you were given, to be, and there's a lot of overlap, to be kind, to be generous, to all the good human qualities. But the point is, your experience, your whatever you call it, consciousness, awareness, you will carry on experiencing after you die. We're all in agreement about that, the faiths. And then, although they're in agreement about it, like in Christianity, you don't get a lot of information about. And then the information that's there is, it's not directly from Jesus's teachings or even from the Old Testament. But anyway, it's another story. But very clearly, life carries on, and what we do in this human opportunity is crucial for what we'll experience afterwards. As Buddhists, we have our own understanding of that. And so, being wise and intelligent, we plan for the long term. It's why we had the teachings on karma a few months ago. That's all about this planning, doing whatever we can to make the next life even better than this one, and certainly avoiding making the next life worse or tragic because of this one. Now we have, like I say, work to do because we grew up in a world that only thinks of one life. We probably have that habit, even if technically, if you had to fill up a questionnaire, somebody gave you, which religion are you? Buddhist. Do you believe in future lives? Yes, you tick the box. But look inside, deep inside yourself. And yes, maybe you do believe in the idea, but then, and this is the key point, are you living your life accordingly? So this life is just one, just like today is part of this year, this month, this year, this lifetime. It's just today. This life is part of a long series. But we've been given so many tools. We're awakened human beings. This life could change everything, everything. So the challenge is to practice dharma with this long-term view. Now, that's one point I needed to make today. So then there is the suffering. So classically, this idea is evoked, and the way it's evoked is in our joy, if we can use that word, our happiness in undergoing short-term suffering for longer-term happiness in the case of a medical intervention. I spent 6 years, with a lot of the time, with Katya, researching Tibetan medicine and Tibetan medical history as well, a little bit. And medicine in the past wasn't like today. The worlds of anesthetics and so on were much more primitive, yet they did surgery. I met a man in Tibet who'd done something that Tibetan doctors did, and the only other place in the world there are records of this is ancient Egypt, and it's cataract surgery with a golden scalpel, where you come into the eye from the side and you lay the cataract flat. So it doesn't give you good vision, but it gives you more vision than you had through the cloudiness. So this man I met had done more than 1,000 of these operations. And that goes back hundreds, thousands of years. People did surgery. So, at the time these texts were written, going for surgery wasn't like these days where you go and see the consultant and you see the anesthetist and you go in there and you're put gently to sleep, and if you're lucky enough to wake up, it's all over, and then you go for convalescence. It was spectacular. But you're happy for it if it's going to give you a longer life, if it's going to make your quality of life a lot better. If you've got an abscess, you're happy to go to the dentist and get it fixed. So on. So this is a very good example, except now we need to stretch that over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe not too many lifetimes, but until whichever life it is, that your dharma is strong enough and stable enough that the challenge isn't there anymore. You couldn't do anything else but dharma. Dharma is your fiber. You have the strength from past lives of dharma inside you. It's like your bone marrow, it's like your DNA. So that might happen in this life. You might not become Buddha in this life, but you can reach what they call a non-return stage. Never go back. That's possible. Sorry, I need to check the time and have a sip of coffee. So, what kind of things might this involve? Well, story time. Okay, we've had ideas. Another story. There are a couple of versions of this story, but remember we had Asanga's 5 ways of dealing with forbearance. So Asanga's life story, there are various versions, and then these days there are scholars who do all kinds of archaeological and other research. But the traditional Tibetan story is this. It's kind of a long story because it starts with his mum. But, and so, how can you say, a storytellers like to make the story more vivid and more interesting, can sort of maybe bring his mum in more than she was actually in life. So his mum was originally a nun, and her name meant, it's quite significant, right conduct of clarity. And at the time she lived, Buddhism was not in a good state where she was. So where she was in a kingdom called Gandhara. Gandhara these days is where the Pakistan-Afghanistan border is. It was a Buddhist kingdom, wonderful place. When I went through in 1970, I didn't want to leave, even though it wasn't a Buddhist place anymore. Something in that place pulled me. And we were driving to Dharamsala, to the Tibetans. But we stayed a few days more because I felt I was going to meet somebody there. I don't know what, a Sufi mystic, somebody. But the place had something wonderful. But then we had to move on. So anyway, Gandhara was a very special place in Buddhist history. And this nun was there, but Buddhism didn't have super meditators, super scholars, and other faiths were gaining ground, and the quality of Buddhism was a bit on the wane. And she had a vision that she could do something about that, not herself, but by becoming the mum of 2 great minds. So she denunned and found what was drawn to, or however it worked, we don't get the details, a person, a warrior, someone from the warrior caste, and she had a child with him, and then she left him and brought up the child. Now that child was a Sangha, and she brought him up to be a super Buddhist. Later on, when he was sorted, she went and had another child, because the vision was to have 2, this time with a Brahmin, and that became Vasubandhu, a Sangha's half-brother. And later on, much later on, the 2 of those worked together, and they gave us 1/2 of our Mahayana teachings, a very precious half. We consider in our Kagyu tradition the Buddha nature teachings, the bodhisattva level teachings, and so on, came through them. So a Sangha at one point went into retreat. Now, in the Tibetan version of the story, it's his mother who puts him into retreat, and he's quite young. I imagine it in Ken's silly imagination. Imagine you're sort of in your late teens, early 20s. You've been brought up by this very dynamic mother, a single mum who's got an agenda, right, for you, right? And she's taught you and had you taught and sent you to these places. But now she says, in some versions, in other versions, he has a vision that he needs to meditate on Buddha Maitreya. So she puts him in retreat. Then he goes in retreat in a cave, and he does a traditional 3-year retreat on Maitreya. We do 3 years, and then it's 1.5 months. Normally, it's called 3 years and 3 periods. Period is half a moon cycle. So anyway, it doesn't matter. But in that time, our body and our chakras and our energies go through one full cycle. That's the reason it's that time. So he does his meditation on Maitreya Buddha without one single significant experience. He meditates all day, as much as he can of the night. He does his practice purely. So imagine, say you go in, you're 19. Remember what it was like at 19? And now you're 22, 22 and a half. And he thought maybe Mum got it wrong. Maybe I'm not the person for this, because nothing happened, nothing special. So he decided to leave his retreat. So he walks. When you come out of a lot of retreat, you're quite spaced out usually. So he's looking, and he looks up at the rocks, and he sees pigeons nesting in the rocks. But he sees that the holes they nest in have got such smooth entrances. And he's just fascinated. And he thinks, hundreds of generations of pigeons going in, going out, just the feathers of their wings have smoothed the rock. Maybe this is a message that I need to work on this more. So he goes back in another 3 years, and he comes out, and the same thing. No, nothing to show for it. He gets very dejected. So now let's say he's 22 and a half, 23, 24, 25, 26. And youth's going by. And you've just been sitting on your butt in a cave because Mum sent you there. And he leaves again. And this time, after a while, he meets a man, probably the first person he's spoken to in 6 years. And the man's got a piece of iron and a cloth, and he's rubbing the cloth. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I need a sewing needle. I'm making a sewing needle." Right, back in. So he goes back in to retreat. He does another 3 years. So now he's almost 30, maybe older. Still not one sign, even though every day for 3 years he's been practicing. 9 years now he's been practicing. He leaves again, quite dejected. Something similar happens, different versions of this one. One of them, he just sees water dripping on a rock. But where the water's dripped over the centuries, there's a hollow in the rock. In another version of the story, he sees a man digging on a hillside. He goes up close to him and said, "What you doing?" He said, "Oh, you see, my house is down there in the valley. I'm taking this hill away because it stops the sun shining on my house." So then he goes back in, and he, again, same story. So now 12 years, nothing. And he comes out. This time there's no rocks being worn away or needles or anything. He walks for a while, and then he comes across a very, very angry dog. The dog, as soon as it sees him, is barking at him and looks dangerous. But then when he looks more closely as he gets closer to the dog, he sees the reason the dog is so mad is because it's got a big wound in its hind parts. And the wound itself is infested with maggots and little animals. And the dog's suffering an awful lot. So bit by bit, he goes very quietly, slowly. The dog settles down, connects with the dog a bit, and he thinks, I've got to do something about this wound. Gosh, that dog is in such a terrible state. I've got to get these maggots and insects out. But then, what about the insects? I mean, this is their larder. They're eating, they're growing. And anyway, I've got such clumsy fingers. How can I take them away? Because they're tiny. And then the idea comes to him that the only part of his body soft enough to take them out is his tongue, because it's wet and soft. And the wounds stink. They're running with pus. Disgusting. But nevertheless, he cares so much for the dog. Thinks, I'm going to try. And so he bends down, and it's so disgusting. He closes his eyes and puts out his tongue to take. And there's nothing. And he opens his eyes. And in front of him is Buddha Maitreya. His first thought is, where were you all this time? 12 years. Where were you? And Maitreya said, I was there every single moment. But your mind was obscured. And every day of work, a little bit, like the dripping water, like the pigeon's wings, was removing the blockages. So then after that, he is completely exposed to Maitreya's mind. Before that, he's still so, how can you say, incredulous, and that he can't really believe you're there. So Maitreya said, well, I'll sit on your shoulder. So Maitreya shrinks down to shoulder size. He says, go to the village, see what happens. So a Sangha goes to the village and is going around saying, can you see Maitreya? Can you see Maitreya? And people are looking at him like, whoa, man, you're... And then it's just one pious person, old person, says, no, but what are you doing with a dead dog on your shoulder? And so that person could see something. Actually, it's a very insightful story. And after that, he goes to Tushita Paradise for the time of one morning there to receive full transmission. His mind becomes one with Maitreya. But one morning in Tushita Paradise is, depending on the versions you see, either 25 years or 50 years here. So then he teaches. He becomes inseparable from Maitreya. We get the 5 mega texts from Maitreya, including the main Buddha nature text. I translated a big part, 17 years of my life working on that from him. The only reason we have these Buddha nature teachings so beautiful is because of his forbearance over 12 years. Now, his case was like quantum. Nothing, everything, right, at the end. Now, normally it's not like that. We practice progressively. We go step by step. But it will be quite some steps before we get to this non-return, total confidence. Your mind is mainly, these days we say the default state is dharma. It defaults to the dharma reaction. That might take a while. So after this course, we have a little one-off session on the 6 paramitas overview. Then we go to diligence paramita, just 3 sessions. And then after that, I'm going to do a one-off session on the 22 similes for the stages of the path. It's beautiful teaching that comes from a Sangha and gives us an idea of how from total beginners we progress, and then this happens, and that happens, and that happens, and how our bodhicitta evolves. Anyway, normally we do progress. So then what are the challenges? Because we're looking at challenges and forbearance. You're gradually going to a no man's land, perhaps. You're no longer of this world. You don't connect with what everyone's into around you. All your Facebook friends, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're going there. This is their latest adventure. They're admiring each other and all this. And somehow, so me in my hippie days, I couldn't get it. The people were in one way quite emancipated, but the basic message, one of them was, do your thing, man. So once you'd your mind was, you didn't belong to ordinary society, but then people did crafts, they made music. In the end, it was kind of samsara too. You didn't listen to classical music anymore. You played really screechy rock music, twisting the strings that make all your emotions go wild, but you're still into music. And you're not wearing straight clothes. You're making fairy tale clothes, and you look like an elf. You've not got your hair cut short, but you've got nice long hair. It's kind of samsara too, and that do your thing doesn't work. And so you might find, as you're practicing dharma, and especially if you're not living in a dharma community, and even if you are living in a dharma community, you get all sorts of stages of people in there. So you might have a feeling of, I don't really belong anymore, but you haven't found your home yet. You haven't inside yourself gone home, and outside there are very few people that you can really communicate with who you feel they understand. We're on the same path, similar journey. So this may well be a challenge at the beginning. It may be too uncomfortable. Many people can't take the no man's land. The no man's land. You go through leaving samsara, but before you find stability, wonderful experiences, your meditation is firm and stable, your devotion is true devotion because you really understand the qualities in the teachers you have, and so on and so on. So that might be one challenge. And then if you do have friends, and in particular if you're in a couple, if you're in a Buddhist couple, the couples don't automatically evolve at the same pace. You may be left behind, or you may have got to a place and your partner's not there anymore. And there's no way you can communicate it because your basic vision of life is different. And then there's the up and down thing. This one's difficult. I'll take my glasses off and have a sip of coffee. I've got to stop soon anyway. We make promises in beautiful moments. We have moments because of our past karma when we're inspired, we're carried by all the virtue, we're in a good time, a magical time. Sometimes magical coincidences happen. We meet dharma, we meet teachers, circumstances fall into place. And then somebody comes, they talk about the bodhisattva, and well, first we take refuge, we become Buddhist, and then afterwards you hear about bodhicitta. So we're so inspired, and this is all I ever want to do. Of course, so many lifetimes, and then I'm going to free my mind, become Buddha, develop all these paramita, and then I can really help everybody. I'll become a light for the world, and so on. You're totally carried, and from the depths of your heart, you take the bodhisattva commitment. On the crest of the wave. But then our consciousness goes up and it goes down, and things happen. That's the very nature of karma. And inspiration doesn't last. Or sometimes our meditation takes us to a place so spacious, so serene, so blessed. And we make deep promises, and we think, at the time it feels like, well, it's going to be like this forever from now on. And then sometimes without even noticing it, it gradually disappears. And it's only when you get a similar experience again that you realize how much you lost the previous one. When you're brought back into focus. So there's this up and down cyclical time nature, whereby when things are tough, when things are low, when the inspiration's not there, when the inspirers aren't there with you, then we can so easily feel like giving up or get drawn back into samsara, find a compromised mind where we think, oh well, I can still be a good Buddhist and live in the world, or whatever it is. Our forbearance, and then we might call it a bit patience, is to hang on in there, to remember a Sangha story. Everything he gave the world that's benefited literally millions of people through hanging on in through those 12 years of practice. 12 years, centuries and centuries of benefit for millions of people. But in the 12 years, we need to develop a lot of strength. So here it's no longer dealing with somebody who's angry and not retaliating and upsetting circumstances. It's the conflict in our own mind, this is the point, between age-old ego and its habits and bodhicitta, which wants to take us to enlightenment. And we need to nourish and nurture and keep alive and make stronger and stronger the bodhicitta. Okay, one more story, and this is the story of Nanda. It's a cruel story. If you've got, how can you say, worldly eyes, it's a painful story to listen to. And well, let me tell you the story. Nanda was a relative, a cousin of the Buddha. And so he was wealthy, well-off, young, handsome. And he'd married quite recently, very, very beautiful young lady. And they were living as a happily, newly married couple. His wife was afraid of the Buddha because the Buddha had such a wonderful presence. And what was happening is that people were just leaving everything and going simply to be with the Buddha and receive his teachings because it was just so brilliant. It's like a shaft of sunlight in a dark forest. Buddha's presence was unlike any other. And she thought, she knew her husband, the Buddha's cousin, if he got too involved, she'd lose him. She really loved him, really, really loved him. And then one day, I just saw him. Can you put your hand up if I'm still here? My screen said poor connection. Okay, thank you. She saw the Buddha approaching her house, and her stomach dropped. And she could see, Ananda could see the Buddha was coming, and he was going to go to the door and greet him. And it said she took a drop of water and put it on Ananda's forehead and said, "Promise me you'll be back before the water evaporates." But Nanda went, not Ananda, he's somebody else, Nanda. He went to the door and he opened to the Buddha, and the Buddha didn't say anything. He just turned around and started walking away. And all that Nanda wanted to do was to follow him. The presence, this beautiful love for all beings, amazing peace and light, actually literally they say that Buddha's light radiated from his body. When our present Karmapa was young and a nomad, his sister said, I used to go and sit next to him in the tent to do sewing because of the light from his body. Anyway, so Buddha, Nanda just followed the Buddha. So the poor wife, she would put yourself in her place. It's terrible. And then he didn't actually take the monk's vows. He stayed with the Buddha, but he was hesitating about the vows. And Buddha could see that all the time Nanda was torn. He was torn between Buddha himself, and then he had the image of his wife, memories of his wife. You know, they just got married. It must have been such enticing, beautiful memories. And he knew this was not working. So he said to Nanda, come with me, let's take a walk. And they walked into the forest. And at one point there was a she-monkey sitting in the tree. And Buddha said, you see the monkey up there? And said, yeah. So he says, who's more beautiful? Your wife or that monkey? And Nanda says, oh, my wife, she's 1,000 times more beautiful than the monkey. And he's thinking of her. Buddha says, right. And he says, now take my hand. And then through his psychic powers, he takes him to one of the Deva realms. And there he introduces him to a goddess. Now, I don't know how many goddesses you've met, but they're quite something. Not only was she 1,000 times more beautiful than his wife, but, well, in the old days we'd have said the vibes, man. The presence there is just like nothing on this earth. Sometimes the story's got more details than this, and this is the simple version, right? So then the Buddha says, who is more beautiful, this goddess or your wife? And all of his attachment to his wife just dropped away because of the comparison. It's a very, very cruel story in many ways, I find. Maybe you don't. So after that, Nanda's attachment was gone. And he took the vows, and he became very, very good monk. So when Trungpa Rinpoche was telling this story, and I don't have time to develop what he said because we've gone a long way this morning, but there are implications for this that touch on all of our Vajrayana practice, why we visualize peaceful, beautiful places, wrathful, angry places. It's to give us perspective. This perspective we don't have because of the way we've been conditioned as we grow up, where we think only in terms of one life, and we're trying to grab what we can from it while we're still functioning. a bit of happiness here, a bit of happiness there, companionship here, companionship there. Travel to there while we can. We've still got the money, still got the strength, but it's still possible, whatever. We're trying to make do in an overall context of one life. That's our conditioning. So we need the 4 ways of changing the mind. We need to meditate. We need all sorts of help. So we help ourselves really believe about future lives, and also to have some idea of how different they will be. It won't just be you come back like you are now. It will be a whole new opportunity, and through the power of karma, now we can program that new opportunity. So inside, in our mind, we have the challenges of forbearance, whereby we hang on in with our dharma practice according to all the instructions we get in the face of the pulls of samsara, our own minds, habit patterns of thinking, of looking on everything, so that we have this long-term bodhisattvas perspective, and in particular the faith of who we will become and where we're going. Only up, only better, only more and more wonderful. And as Taisitupa says, even if it's 1% progress each life, it's a little bit better next time, and in 100 lives you're Buddha. Let's dedicate whatever was useful and good in this session. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained, through the main enemy, our mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by the waves of rebirth, aging, sickness and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not arisen. May its development know no setbacks. May it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may we all quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. Thank you. Sorry, it was a bit of a long session, but I had it in my head to say those things and tell the stories. Over to you if you have any comment or question.
Thank you, Ken. Quite profound class today. Something's dawned upon me. You've talked a lot today about future lives and the longevity of our mind through different future lives. Obviously, we've had past lives, lots of past lives, and obviously we've not been perfect in those past lives. We've created negative karma and we've suffered in those past lives. And the consequence of that is here with us today.
Mm-hmm.
So it's dawned upon me, I can feel it right now, like a trainload of stuff that's with me right now. I could almost feel not like a pressured weight, but a kind of burden.
Yeah. And Vajrasattva practice, which is called in Tibetan is called Shakpa. Shakpa actually means, we translate it as like purify, and so on. It actually means to lay down the burden.
Mm.
This burden we've been dragging, it's like a heavy rucksack or a heavy load. Gosh, I saw yesterday a picture of a Nepali porter carrying 5 gas bottles on his back, roped together. I mean, one gas bottle was heavy, and he was walking up a hillside with 5. So it's like, and I've seen these porters when they set down the burden, very slowly because they weigh so much. And then it's on the ground, and you feel light as a feather. So purification practice is for that. And when you were speaking initially, I remember something. Khenpo taught him. He made us learn a lot of Khenpo's teachings by heart. But in Tibetan, Se Dila Chapin Nempo Mitapagom, Se Chimala Chapin Nempo, then the Korwadan Pungnal Gom. So we had to learn things. And Khenpo says just what you were saying. How come? We've had so many lives. And in the past lives, we've met so many teachers and received the Dharma. And obviously, we've had Dharma because we're here now. Why isn't it any better than, why am I not so much better than I am? And then it says there are 4 reasons. And actually, Gampo says he develops those 4 as the main basis, backbones for the whole text. He says there have been 4 obstacles in the past. The first obstacle, we're too involved with this life. The remedy is to meditate deeply on impermanence. Second obstacle is we're not involved in the things and the people of this life necessarily, but we're still very much involved in life itself. A feeling, a need to be, a feeling that we've not done everything yet, that our earthly story is not resolved, all this kind of attachment to being itself. And he said the remedy to that is to understand more and more about karma and suffering, the price of being. The third obstacle was a meditator's obstacle, is we got too involved with the beauty and serenity of meditation. Because there are all sorts of meditations available on planet Earth, and they produce serenity, they produce bliss and well-being in the body, but that's not what we're after. We're after liberation. So through getting involved with bliss and peace, we were held back. And the remedy to that is loving kindness and compassion meditations, because we were involved basically with meditation experience for ourselves. It was nice, and we got more and more involved with it. It's one of the traps. It's shamatha's like a vacuum cleaner. It draws you in. It's so nice, and you want it to be even nicer and even more peaceful and even more blissful and so on. It's not about helping others. Loving kindness and compassion changes our whole motivation and mindset. And the fourth one says simply ignorance of what you need to do to become free and enlightened. And for this, there are the teachings on bodhicitta. So all the rest of his book is, most of it is about those 4 remedies, and then about the results, Buddhahood and enlightened activity.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Because the point for me really was that, heading into the future that we've been talking about today, there's all this stuff behind. And it's a big thing to pull through. So I take the point about Vajrasattva.
Yeah. I mean, the point about Vajrasattva is it's all about identification, identity. I am me, I'm my karma, I'm my whole karmic baggage, I'm my whole story. But the more we think about Vajrasattva above our heads, that's the real me. At present, it's manifest in our lives in form of teacher and gurus. But we're holding our mind in who we really are and using who we really are to shed the burden of our karmic baggage. It's what you might call deep mind work. It's entering into a dialogue, into an energetic dialogue between our Buddha nature and our karmic baggage.
Thank you.
And I have a question, quick question, I hope. This part about forbearance and the acceptance of suffering, 2 points in that. Is this the diligence aspect of forbearance? And secondly, when I saw the acceptance of suffering, I know in my life that as soon as I accept something, it becomes naturally less painful. So I was surprised that it didn't mean that.
Yeah, the general guideline with acceptance and suffering is accepting what cannot be changed. And if something can be changed, and if it's worth the effort to change it, then we do try and change things for the better. That's a really very, very basic guideline. It's in the 12 points, Alcoholics Anonymous, and all sorts of things, the same idea. Very, very, it's just simply wise idea. I mean, if you can't change it, it's either going to be upsetting you or we accept it because it's unchangeable. But if something can be changed, then we can. I don't know what else to say except to do what I've done, which is to develop the traditional teachings, which give us an idea of forbearance. Diligence, which we come to next, it says it is not a something in its own right. I mean, you can be generous, you can practice right conduct, as we've seen, and then when the circumstances call for it, we can practice forbearance. But you can't just sit down and be diligent. You can be diligently generous, you can be diligently practicing right conduct, you can be diligently practicing forbearance, but you can't just be diligent. And if I say now, okay, let's do 5 minutes, let's just be diligent, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You can't just be diligent. You can't practice diligence. So it says diligence is a very necessary part of the 6 paramita, but it's a bit different because it's about the way we do the other ones. So yes, part of forbearance is diligence, of course, but we're treating it as forbearance still, because basically forbearance is about getting rid of an upset mind for good. I don't know if that helps, Vicky. I don't know if that really addresses your question.
Yes and no. I think I suppose I'm just surprised that that the acceptance part of suffering isn't underlined within the forbearance teachings. Of this very common acceptance is pretty wise idea, but it's not, is it? It's not in there. It's before there, maybe.
It is in there. It's in there. It's mainly in the first sort of forbearance, and that's why I said it's a bit complicated, because it sits between the first and the second sort of forbearance, because the first one is from what is other. So with like physical suffering, for instance, our own body health and that kind of thing, then seen from a bodhisattva vision, our body is other. It's a home that we're parked in, that we're in for this life, but it's not us. While we're alive, it's part of our story, of course. Can't really separate body and mind, but in the Precious Human Existence teachings, it says, treat this body like a horse you're riding, or like a boat you're crossing a river in. It's a vehicle. So then if we see it as other in that sense, then when it causes us grievance, when it's painful and irritating or upsetting, then we accept what can't be changed, and then what can be changed, if it's worthwhile changing, like healthcare, medication.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so then.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Catherine, and everybody. No. And a quick hello and goodbye to those I didn't say hello to at the beginning. I see the other Catherine and Brendan, Susan, Michelle, a few people. So Graham, Mariano, and all of you. Have a lovely week. So I think next week is our last session on forbearance, and there we'll look at the third aspect, which is forbearance of the truth, especially the truth of shunyata, and its forbearance related to, you say, a later stage of the path, or one stage of the path, not usually a beginner's stage. But in the larger picture of this life and the future lives to come, as we're working our way up to the very free mind, then that third aspect of forbearance will become the most important one. At our stage, learning to deal with anger and irritation and frustration is the most important one. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you, Ken.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.